Right now, join T-Mobile and get an unlimited family plan with Netflix included, so you can watch in more places than ever before on your phone, tablet, or TV. Plus, buy one Samsung Galaxy S9 and get one free with 24 monthly bill credits, so you and your family can binge your Netflix favorites on your new phones. Call 1-800-T-Mobile or visit a store today.
Unlimited data on their network. Video streams at 480p. Small fraction of customers using over 50 gigs per month may have reduced speeds. If you cancel, balance is due. Well-qualified customers, full price, $720 plus tax. Finance agreements required. Netflix for 2 screens. Terms apply.
It's the Autosport podcast. We ask what's behind Lewis Hamilton's return to form in the Spanish Grand Prix, and what was Romain Grosjean thinking? Lewis Hamilton claimed his second consecutive Grand Prix victory in Spain with victory in Barcelona, a dominant performance, and he was very, very happy with life after that. The last race, he said, was a bit of a lottery. This one, he was bang on form and absolutely delighted. I'm your host, Ed Straw, and joining me to look back at the Spanish Grand Prix in our rooftop apartment. That sounds a little bit grandiose. We're basically in the attic in a flat somewhere near the Circuit de Catalunya just after midnight to reflect on this race. First guest, Stuart Codling, bizarrely sitting on a very small turquoisey blue, kind of Leighton House colour.
It's very close to Leighton House.
A very small stool. What's the story there?
We discovered to our cost that the actual chairs in here are quite squeaky, so to spare you from spending the next 24 hours editing this, or editing as some TV people would say, I thought I'd sit on a small child's blue stool, which has 4 legs, which apparently, according to my father-in-law, is suboptimal. He thinks chairs should have 3 legs, and then they won't wobble, whatever surface they're on. Well,
there we go. 3-wheeling on the chair, as it were. I have to say, in no way does sitting on the child's turquoise stool that's about 12 inches high, maybe 15 inches, something like that. In no way does that damage your credibility. You look every bit as dignified, influential and insightful and regal as you always do when you're on these podcasts.
I don't know what you mean. I miss my wife's Eurovision party to come to this Grand Prix.
I'm sure the Eurovision party was all the better for it. Now, my second guest, Scott Mitchell. Now, this actually is your bedroom for the week. How are you finding this unusual L-shaped configuration? I should add that rather bizarrely, this doesn't come across very well in the podcast. We're sort of sat in a dark corner of this room because this is where the conveniently located plug is, so we can actually power the equipment we need to record this.
Yeah, I've already had a sort of seating shunt, haven't I, before the start of this podcast. I could have done with my bizarre, square, soft, I don't even know what to call it, really.
It's a poof, isn't it?
It feels a bit like that. I don't really know what it is, but whatever I'm sitting on, I probably needed 3 legs instead of this because I had an almighty near shunt, didn't I? Just now fell off the back. So what a wonderful end to a really, really long day, a really long 4 days in Barcelona. I've almost injured myself recording a podcast.
It's because you failed to keep 3 points of contact at all times.
Also, Scott, when you did have your wobble, you tried to use the edge of the sofa, the kind of armrest of the sofa, to steady yourself.
Which isn't a sofa.
Well, shortly before that, when you weren't here, I'd almost fallen off the edge of the sofa, thinking I could get away with leaning on it.
The things we do to bring these people this podcast.
Exactly.
We better make it a good one then.
Well, there's a first time for everything, isn't there? First time for everything. One person who did make it a good one, what a beautiful segue this is into the serious business of the podcast, is Lewis Hamilton. Now, the first 4 races of the season, he wasn't especially happy with things. I guess Australia we should set aside because he would have won that without the virtual safety car and the arrow over the delta they needed to Sebastian Vettel to regain track position. But he was actually happy with the car. He said he had confidence in it on race day, that it was more predictable, it had the rear stability that he wanted. So what's going on here? Is this Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes being back after their early season tyre troubles?
Well, it was predictable and it had the rear stability that he wanted. I suppose the elephant in the room here is that
we couldn't get an elephant up that split little narrow spiral staircase that I almost got wedged in.
I'll tell you what, I had the soft shoe shuffle up there. It's very, very hard.
I'm the one that had to haul my suitcase up here on day one, so imagine how I felt.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing the noise. But yeah, so the elephant that isn't in the room because we couldn't fit it up here is the reduced tread depth on the Pirellis, which seem to have, I don't know, it's enabled them to run without blisters at all this weekend. I haven't heard a single report of a blister, and if you think back to the pre-season Barcelona test, pretty much everyone was reporting blisters, and there are some whispers, stroke gripes that this change has favoured Mercedes, and the way it's sort of come out in the wash is that some people are accusing the FIA and Pirelli of favouring Mercedes, which is absolute nonsense. I think what's happened is that a change has been made that has shaken out in one team's favour, and as that dawning realisation has crept over the horizon, people are starting to moan.
One thing we need to remember is that in testing, Mercedes was very, very competitive here, particularly on the harder of the tyres. Did seem to stay away from the softer compounds, and again, basically the impact of what Pirelli did here was sort of, it gave the effect of bringing a harder tyre here. That wasn't really what they did, but that was sort of the general description of it. That was the impact of their change for this circuit, and also for the races at Paul Ricard and Silverstone, because they've been resurfaced. They're going to be high energy circuits. So it was the change that Codder's reference is for safety measures, but it's basically just means all the teams have to deal with it. Sebastian Vettel said that it affects everybody, but the difference is, of course, that it affects each team differently based on the characteristics of their car. It does seem to have helped Mercedes a bit, because the limitations that they've had on tyres, this just sort of put them into a more preferable operating window. But it also has to be said that Mercedes have worked extremely hard to understand the Pirellis, to get their car working better, to widen the operating window that they have to work with. And even though he only just about managed to keep Bottas at bay in qualifying, I have to say that Lewis was in a class of his own today, wasn't he? He was absolutely untouchable, and in the first stint he was pulling away from Vettel to the tune of about a second a lap, almost.
He was over the horizon, wasn't he?
Without any concern.
Well, after that safety car period we had for the shunt triggered by Romain Grosjean, which I'm sure we'll come back to later, there was a period of about 10 laps basically between the restart and Vettel pitting, where I think Hamilton average was pulling just over 0.65 a lap on him, so consistently pulling away. Vettel didn't have any answer at all for that.
You mentioned that Hamilton was very, very good in Australia and deserved the win there, but we didn't see that level of performance in Australia, did we? It was a much smaller, sort of gradual eking clear from Lewis here.
Certainly in the race, yeah. 6/10 in qualifying.
Yeah, but we recognise that was a sort of slightly anomalous gap. I mean, in race conditions, I don't remember the last time I saw Lewis like this. I can't think of a race towards the end of last season where he looked this in control, and you could see what it meant to him, couldn't you, at the end of the race? And afterwards he talked quite eloquently, as he always does, about the sort of positive energy he's been feeling, and the fact that he just had a car that he could do what he wants with. And you sort of mentioned it at the beginning. He got lucky in Baku, and he knew that, and that hurt, I think, that he'd inherited a win that other people had earned.
And when he talked about that, some people gave him some stick for that, but he was being honest and heartfelt and eloquent about that feeling. He wasn't trying to make himself look like some hero for being noble about it. No, he genuinely wasn't happy with his performance.
Exactly, but the opposite can be said here. He said that he viewed this race as a test bench. That was the phrase he used of how hard he could push the car and what he could learn from it. And he just didn't back off, and it was just relentless. And I think he beat Bottas by some 20 seconds or just over 20 seconds in the end. So it was just I don't use the phrase lightly. I think it was a genuine masterclass from Lewis today. I
mean, there was some suggestion that Bottas was having to fuel save at the end, but
I think that was about the tyres, because he was being asked to manage the tyre because the front left was getting pretty difficult. He said at the end he could see that it was down to the canvas, which is quite a relative term. But the problem that Bottas was having is he was being told, right, manage the load on the front left. And his response, there's one point where he was told to manage it more, and he just said, no, can't. And the reason was because if you ease off too much, you then lose tyre temperature. And when you're very low down on the tread and you lose tyre temperature, you might never get it back. So he was walking this tightrope.
Well, we've all been fascinated by the tyre pressure, the live tyre pressure readout on our Opel Insignia hire car this weekend.
Well, I had to give you a warning not long ago about was it the rear right that was a bit hot? Or was it the rear left?
It had gone up a bit. Yeah, they're in kilopascals, the readout, so it does seem to be a little bit more exaggerated because it's a higher number.
One thing on tyres, we did talk a little bit about the Pirelli thing, but I think there's been so many conspiracy theories here. I'm just going to devote a few seconds, a few minutes, whatever, just to explaining the sequence of events that actually led to Pirelli doing this. They had the problem with blistering in testing, resurfaced circuit, very different, grippier surface, smoother surface, so we saw improved lap times. Loads of teams were having blistering in testing, Ferrari included, McLaren, Mercedes. This wasn't just Mercedes asking. They were aware of this. They consulted with all the teams. They prepared a report and a recommendation that went to the FIA. All the teams knew about it, saying, right, for this race, for Paul Ricard and for Silverstone, we're going to reduce the tread depth by 0.4 millimetre, which is, I think, in the neighbourhood of about 10% of the tread depth. I don't know the exact full tread depth because that's quite a closely guarded secret, but it is in that vicinity. So everybody went through this. They didn't change the compounding. It was not a harder tyre, as Scott said. It did maybe have some of the characteristics in the feel to the driver more important. It didn't give them the same stability and confidence, but that was the process that this has all gone through. So this stuff with Ferrari drivers complaining about it and suggesting it was a Mercedes changes, it's really
it's
not
law
correct.
of unintended consequences, isn't it? And very often people ask for something and then don't like what they get.
I think it was a bit of a mistranslation because I'm pretty sure the original, not request, but the initial suggestion came from Mercedes. I think they saw pretty high... I think they saw pretty intense blistering in testing like a lot of other teams did, and I think it was a Mercedes suggestion to Pirelli that this could be a major problem in the warmer month of May.
Well, I think Pirelli were aware of this already.
Well,
they spoke to all
exactly.
the teams.
So this is the point. So Mercedes mentioned it, but Pirelli carried out their own investigation. The other teams supported it as well. Mercedes weren't on their own in terms of the teams that were saying to Pirelli and the FIA, maybe you want to do this. So Pirelli and the FIA then carried it out. And then this is the thing that I don't get about the conspiracy theories is if you were going to try and use a special favour or something like that to have a rule change, why would you do it for 3 out of 21 races? Because that's what I feel that's the point that some people are missing. This is only for 3 races. So if this does give Mercedes some supposed advantage, and we do have to say there was a massive swing in qualifying and race performance here from the last few races, Ferrari has been on top since Australia. It is for 3 races, and that is ultimately not going to define the season as a whole. So I think people do sort of need to get back in their box a little bit and accept that this is just something that happens in Grand Prix racing.
Conspiracy theories are inherently self-validating, though, aren't they? But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Everyone with the tinfoil hats on is seeing you're part of the conspiracy. But no, what it can do is it can eliminate a problem for someone, even if it doesn't help them. And Mercedes have been struggling with it, and it was very clear that, you know, you could see it trackside as well, like Red Bull and Ferrari, even on the kind of turn-in, it was a little bit more, the car was a little bit more lively on turn, a bit more responsive, almost like they had a bit more responsive steering dialed into it, and they were struggling a bit with that. And the Mercedes has always been quite pointy, should we say. And I don't think it's changed a great deal for them, but they were just able to get it to work. And I was watching in P3 when they did their performance runs on the Super Softs, which a lot of people were struggling to get the best out of, and actually Mercedes, in taking first and second on the grid, Hamilton ahead by 400ths of a second from Bottas, they got the Super Softs working. And watching them in P3, you could see the Mercedes looked pretty happy running through the long turn 3 right-hander. And the Ferraris were just a little bit, not all over the place, but just a tiny bit less connected to the track. So you could see what the problem was there. The Red Bulls as well were just that little bit more lively and not quite as planted. So I think it's the thing that sometimes you can have an effect on the relative competitiveness through a perfectly legitimate change, just because it happens to benefit someone or make it easier to possibly manage their problems. It doesn't necessarily mean it's deliberate. And I do think Mercedes have done so much work to solve this problem, as they're always going to do, that's also played into it. But it's interesting with Mercedes, the point, before I kind of interrupted it with going
before
back
you
into
interrupted yourself, Ed.
Yeah, interruptions, self-interruptions. It's a whole cavalcade of them. Well, we saw how big an advantage Hamilton did have over Bottas. The race circumstances did exaggerate it a little bit, with Bottas having to stop a bit earlier maybe than he wanted to in order to take advantage of Vettel's early stop to jump him, which he did everything he needed to do, and the team was right with the strategy, but obviously things didn't go quite as well as hoped. So what do we make of that battle, with Vettel initially ahead, Bottas seemingly having done the work to jump him and then not, and then Verstappen managing to get ahead of Vettel when Vettel stops again? It's quite an interesting little battle for that group.
Well, it was. Scott and I nudged each other at that point because we were starting to think